our motherland of Africa. Drums were used to communicate amongst villages. And through the talking drum, we could warn of danger, announce a birth or a successful kill. Or we could call a solemn assembly. And tonight, we are calling such a gathering because we have a story to tell.
A story as beautiful as it is painful, profound and mysterious.
A story in which each of you, without even knowing it, play a part.
So gather round and listen to our story. This is Contraband. Late in the 15th century, Portugal and Spain began enslaving Africans to work their sugar plantations in the Caribbean. The discovery of gold and central in South America required even more labor. And by the middle of the 1500s, slavery was exploding. To be sure, this was not the first time such a thing had happened. Slavery is as old as mankind itself, but the transatlantic slave trade was particularly cruel and prolific. Between the 16th and 19th centuries, somewhere between 10 and 12 million Africans were abducted from their homes and taken away on slave ships.
I look up to the horizon with tears in eyes and hope forlorn to a place I fix my eyes on, where promise lives and then be born. Carry on, through the pain and through the storm. Though your heart and arms are heavy, carry on, carry on.
In 1690, a Spanish man of war was attacked off the coast of Mexico by an English pirate by the name of John Colin Job. Job thought that the ship was carrying gold, but after 3 days of battle, he boarded the ship only to find the hull full of Africans. With no real plan, he gathered the healthiest and set sail for the new English colony in North America at Point Comfort, or what we know today as Fort Monroe in Hampton, Virginia. But slavery was not yet legal in England, so Job couldn't sell it. The details of what happens next are mysterious, but we know that Job docked at Point Comfort and set sail home to England. But the Africans were left with an ambiguous status in the eyes of their new home. Certainly not free, not quite slaves, not quite human. This was the end of the beginning.
If you look, you'll see yonder dancing just behind the door. Oh, well, we no longer wonder, chains and tears forever gone. Carry on, when the affliction's chasm yawns, though your heart and legs are weary, carry on, carry on. and John Punch were serving alongside two Europeans, and they were all indentured servants, and they decided to break their indenture and run away. And when they were captured, the two Europeans received 4-year extensions of their servitude. John Punch, however, was sentenced to serve his master for the remainder of his natural life. And not only was John Punch the first ever legal slave, his case set a precedent for lifelong servitude as a punishment for black people in America.
That same year, Massachusetts became the first colony to pass a law legalizing slavery for those taken captive in war.
And in 1662, Virginia established a law that said any person born to an enslaved mother would also be designated as an enslaved person.
And in the late 1660s, most colonies made it illegal for non-whites to own guns.
And it became illegal for enslaved persons to testify in court, and they were made ineligible for trial by jury.
So you see, slavery was not a single decision by a single person or a single group of people. But over time, as each generation became willing to accept the injustices of the previous, the nation as a whole found itself willing to see what had once been deemed unacceptable.
We developed a tolerance for the intolerable.
And an enslaved black people found a strength of character and an endurance of spirit that would preserve us in one of history's darkest epochs. The election of 1860 was one of the most contentious in American history.
You think politics is ugly today? You ain't seen nothing.
Abraham Lincoln won the Electoral College despite only capturing 40% of the popular vote. The nation was divided over the results, literally.
South Carolina seceded December 20, 1860.
Mississippi, January 9th, 1861.
Florida, January 10th.
Alabama, January 11th.
Georgia, January 19th.
Louisiana,
January 26th.
and Texas, February 1. Yeah.
February 1861, at a convention in Montgomery, Alabama, the 7 seceded states created the Confederate Constitution, and they named Jefferson Davis as the provisional president of the Confederacy.
Sure did.
And the Confederacy began seizing federal forts all throughout the South. But on April 12th, they seized Fort Sumter in South Carolina by force, and the nation was officially at war.
Now you see, Virginia was on the brink of secession, but still under federal control. So President Abraham Lincoln decided to dispatch some reinforcements to Fort Monroe in Hampton, a strategic military compound that jutted into the Chesapeake Bay. He selected Major General Benjamin Butler to take command of Fort Monroe, and he dispatched him without delay, with only one mission: hold Fort Monroe at all costs.
On May 22nd, 1861, Major General Benjamin Butler arrives at Fort Monroe.
And on May 23rd, Virginia voted to secede.
And overnight, Virginia becomes the new front of the Civil War. Many Virginians began packing up their families and their belongings and taking them deeper into the South.
The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 made it a federal crime to provide food, shelter, or aid of any kind to a runaway slave. So the enslaved people of southeastern Virginia were facing a terrifying future, one that would certainly separate them from their extended families, their friends, and their loved ones. A future where the horrors of slavery would grow deeper in a new country whose founding was largely based on slavery as the cornerstone of its national economy.
So Shepard Mallory
And Frank Baker.
James Townsend, three men who couldn't bear the thought of such a future. So, on May 23rd, 1861,
the same day Virginia votes to secede,
these three men did the unthinkable.
The unthinkable.
In the dead of night, they slipped quietly across the marsh, knocked the gates of Fort Monroe, seeking freedom for themselves and for their families.
ringing to the stepping out where there's no light along the way. If it means I walk alone, I only know that I can stay in high over I simply cannot stay. The only path for me is moving forward. So high over I only know tomorrow won't find me here. Those three men were given entrance into Fort Monroe and taken straight away to General Butler.
And the next morning, Major John Carey of Virginia's 155th Militia arrived at the gates of Fort Monroe under a white flag. He was seeking a meeting with General Butler on behalf of Colonel Mallory, the slave's owner, who was demanding that they be returned to him under the provisions of the Fugitive Slave Act.
Now it bears mentioning that at this point, General Butler was not an abolitionist.
But he was a lawyer, a man of great intellect and great ego. He didn't like to be pushed around.
So he was faced with a dilemma: obey the law and return these men,
Or let them stay, violate the Constitution, and give his enemies legal grounds to retaliate.
But General Butler improvised a third legal argument that was so brilliant, it almost seems divine.
General Butler, sir, what are your intentions with regard to these Negroes?
well, I intend to hold them, of course.
You mean you would set aside your constitutional obligation to return them?
Well, I mean then, sir, to take Virginia at her word, because as declared in the Ordinance of Secession passed just yesterday, I am under no constitutional obligation to a foreign country, which Virginia now claims to be. I intend to keep these men as contraband of war.
Contraband of war. It was a stunning legal argument. See, contraband is a term used in maritime law to describe munitions and weapons that are seized from an enemy ship. By law, a nation is permitted to keep said weapons that were used against them in war. Virginia did not consider slaves to be people, but property. And since they had just seceded, they were a foreign country. So General Butler reasoned that those slaves could be confiscated and held, just as if they were muskets or cannons.
The news and term contraband spread like wildfire. Within 24 hours, 50 more had arrived at the fort and been granted entrance. Within 3 months, over 1,000 men, women, and children fled the bonds of slavery to find food, shelter, education, and for the first time, wages for their work.
And over the period of the Civil War, over 10,000 enslaved persons made their way to the gates of Fort Monroe in search of freedom.
Contraband camps began springing up in federal forts all over the country. And by 1865, over 500,000 African Americans enjoyed their first taste of freedom in the contraband camps. There's a tremble in my hand, gravel in my gut, my bones can feel the chill. Today's the day I took my stand. If I don't now, I never will. And I won't look back. The future isn't clear, but I can see the prize on the horizon. I won't look back. I only know tomorrow won't find me here. A moment, a solitary moment, can divide your life into now and then. Is was a moment, like any other moment. But after this moment, nothing is the same. So I won't look back. The generations in me never been resist decision. So I won't look back. I only know tomorrow will always, always remember. I won't look back. I simply cannot stay. The only path for me moving forward. So I won't look back. I only know tomorrow won't find me here. If those slaves coming over in 1619 meant the end of the beginning, the contraband decision meant the beginning of the end.
The first enslaved Africans in English colonies in America were brought to this peninsula on a ship flying a Dutch flag in 1619, beginning a long, ignoble period of slavery in the colonies and later this nation. 200 years later, Fort Monroe became a place of refuge for those later generations escaping enslavement. During the Civil War, Fort Monroe was the site of General Benjamin Butler's contraband decision in 1861, which provided a pathway to freedom for thousands of enslaved people and served as a forerunner of President Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation of 1863. Thus, Old Point Comfort marks both the beginning and the end of slavery in our nation.
The beginning and end of slavery in our nation. And yet, the story still feels unresolved. Today, over 150 years later, we still wrestle with the lingering effects of slavery. So, tonight, while we celebrate the significance of the contraband decision, we still face a lingering question.
See, people of goodwill of every race are left to wrestle with this. What do we do now? Is there anything constructive that we can do to move on the path towards healing and wholeness?
We'd like to offer two suggestions for your consideration.
One, if this is your very first time hearing this story, ask yourselves why. Why have you never heard this story before? You know, a biblical writer One said, how will they know unless someone tells them? So, here's something constructive that all of you can do. You can tell the story.
Tell the story. Tell the story. Talk it over tonight at dinner with friends. Invite someone else right here to watch the show. Watch it with someone of a different race. And don't be afraid to talk about it. Tell the story. Tell the story.
We all can tell the story.
And you know, there's something else we can do. And it might seem so small, so seemingly insignificant, that you might be inclined to dismiss it. But out of all the atrocities associated with the institution of slavery, arguably one of the worst is something that might not seem obvious initially. Slavery erased generations of people from existence. Most of the people who perished under the yoke of slavery, we will never know of, because their stories are simply buried underneath the sands of time.
And slaves weren't even considered human. For that fact, they weren't counted in the census.
You know, they didn't keep record of their birth certificates or the death certificates at City Hall. They didn't keep record of their marriages either. So there's some that are remembered through oral traditions or family Bibles. There are some that just happen to be on an inventory list. So that there are some things that we all can do. We can tell their stories. We can also say their names.
Say the name.
Say the name. You know, sounds so simple, but when you mention their name, you acknowledge they existed. And in the very real sense, you restore to them in death what was taken from them in life. The dignity of being known and remembered.
Say the name, Shepard Mallory. Shepard was born in 1835, and he was 26 and married at the time of the Contraband decision. In all, he had 4 children, Shepard Jr., Willie, Frank, and Lucy. And at the end of emancipation, he became a carpenter, and then an oysterman, and later in his life, a school janitor. He lived his entire life in Hampton, Virginia, and died at the ripe old age of 89 in 1924. Say the name with me, Shepard Mallory.
Shepard Mallory.
Say the name.
Say the name with me, Frank Baker. See, Frank was 32 at the time of the Contraband decision. He and his wife Mary settled in Elizabeth City County. He was a farmer, she was a housekeeper. Together they had 3 children. And Frank died at the age of 58. So say the name with me, Frank Baker.
Say the
name. Say the name, James Townsend. You know, we know nothing about James. We don't know who he was or what happened to him. All we know is his name. So, say the name, James Townsend.
James Townsend.
So what do we do? And what can we say when oceans of tears cannot wash away the stain? Faces of the